Yes, I'm Charles Crouch. I am a major Disney fan, as you can see. I first went to Disney World. My parents took me when I was 18 months old. The first movie I saw in the theater was a local re-showing of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I am a D23 member, the official Disney fan club. I'm a Walt Disney World annual pass holder, a Disney Vacation Club member, and a proud Disney adult. On social media, my handle is Milky D23. Milky was a high school nickname because of my hair, and D23 because of the D23 fan club. So I am a Disney fan. I want to get started here before we jump into history. This is a visual graphic of the colors of all the Disney films. From minute one to the end there, you can kind of see some black spaces where the credits would be rolling. I just always thought that's a really fun visual to kind of see all the movies there. We're going to start early in time. In 1923, Walt Disney and his brother Roy started the Disney Brothers Studio as a short film animation studio. Their first major pieces were the Alice comedies, which combined a live-action little girl with animated characters on screen, fairly innovative for the 20s. And in the mid-20s, they had major success with one of their first characters, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. For about 2-3 years, Oswald was their bread and butter. Several shorts came out starring Oswald. But in 1927, because of a contract snafu, you might say, the company that was distributing the Oswald shorts for Walt took Oswald, the character, complete IP and everything, and most of Walt's animators, and left Walt with almost no one to draw for him, and his bread and butter character was no longer his property. Lest that he would take really to his grave and never let another character be out of his control. On the train ride back from getting his awful news of losing Oswald, he sketched a little mouse character he named Mortimer. On that train ride, his wife said, "That name Mortimer is real stupid." And Lily and his wife renamed the character Mickey Mouse. Mickey's first short came out in 1928, Steamboat Willie. Right after Walt came up with the character Mickey, they had in production 3 shorts. And while they were working on those shorts, Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer came out, the first talkie. And immediately Walt knew that silent cartoons were no longer viable. And he restarted production of all 3 of those Mickey shorts to include synchronized sound and voiceover. No one could do the voice for Mickey the way Walt wanted, so he ended up in the recording booth and was the voice of Mickey until about the 40s. The first short that came out there was Steamboat Willie, and immediately a massive hit. Mickey was a huge character from almost the start. There were unofficial Mickey Mouse clubs before the real one in the 1950s on television. Groups of fans would show up to theaters for the showings of the Mickey shorts, sometimes in costume, but just to get together, kind of like a Mensa gathering, and enjoy being fans themselves of Mickey cartoons. Several other characters were created with those Mickey shorts. We get the main 5, Goofy, Donald, Daisy, Pluto, Minnie, and Mickey, but also several other characters. But Walt had more ideas than could be contained in just his little mouse character. And so they started creating the Silly Symphony cartoons. The first one was going to be Flowers and Trees, and much like with Steamboat Willie, with Mickey's first cartoons, Walt realized that black and white shorts would no longer be viable. And so halfway through the production, they switched from black and white into color on Flowers and Trees. And that was the first short animated film to be released in color, won an Oscar for that. The 1930s, Walt filled with lots of silly symphonies and Mickey cartoons. One of the most popular was The Three Little Pigs. And one of the best songs from that, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, became an anthem for people in the Great Depression. Who's afraid of the Big Bad Wolf? Who's afraid of the depression, the issues we're having? We'll all get through this. And we did. So the early days were mostly filled with shorts, but Walt quickly realized that at their Hyperion Avenue studio, shorts could only get them so far. He was tired of being the addition to the main movie on the marquee. And he had a small animation staff with the shorts, but decided to send them all to art school to improve their craft of animation. And so they learned real life figure drawing and improved just across the board every aspect of their artistic abilities. And Walt decided that they were going to put in production the first full feature-length animated cartoon, which became Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. At the time, it was called Walt's Folly. People thought that it would hurt the audience's eyes to watch an animated cartoon for longer than 10 minutes. But it came out in theaters, was a major hit, and the headline here, Disney's Folly makes history. And everyone immediately knew that feature-length animated cartoons not only would not hurt your eyes, but were going to be a major audience draw. Yeah. While Snow White was in production, Walt also was working on several other follow-ups. The first one was Pinocchio, but they ran into some production issues. As they were improving their artistic ability, they realized that it was going to be a challenge to make a wooden figure move like he was alive. And so they had to start several times to really get that character movement right, where you believed that the limbs were made out of wood, but were moving as if they were alive. And of course, Pinocchio then becomes a real boy at the end. So while Pinocchio had some production issues, Walt got into classical music. Mickey, while so popular in the late 20s and early 30s, had lost some of the excitement around the character. And so going into 1940, Walt wanted to have a reinvigoration of Mickey. They had a redesigned look for him and were going to release a short set to the classical piece, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And in working on that, they realized that it was too big an idea to be contained in just a short film with Mickey. And so it grew into Fantasia, which was a pioneering effort to set animated representations of classical music pieces. Walt called it his masterpiece. He loved the production on Fantasia. When it came out in theaters, it was not as big a hit as he had hoped for, but it found its audience, and particularly like the silly symphonies, it grew in how people grow appreciation for classical music. Pinocchio eventually came out without production issues. Both Fantasia and Pinocchio come out in 1940. In between all of this, they also were working on a little forest piece called Bambi. And much like Pinocchio, they were running into issues of being able to animate the animals in the forest as if they were moving realistically. And so Bambi was in production for 5 full years before it came out. Production issues with Pinocchio, production issues with Bambi. Fantasia didn't make as much as they were hoping for. And so they needed a cheap, affordable hit, but to get something out in theaters. And went back to some of their short film skills and created Dumbo the Flying Elephant. As they were in production on all of these films, there was a major strike at the Disney studio. Within Hollywood in the 1930s, there was a growing movement for unionization. better working guilds for the different industry groups within Hollywood, the animators, the actors, the tech hands, and things like that. And so eventually this unionization movement came to the Disney studio. This also affected the production time on a lot of those movies. Several of the workers, several of the animators were out striking. And so not much was done during that period on the production of those films. Eventually they got to a resolution that when Walt had the small Buena Vista studio, it felt like a family. He was Uncle Walt to everyone. But as they had grown and grown, now they had 4 movies in production simultaneously. It was no longer feasible for the Disney studio to be a family. It needed to operate like a corporation. And unionization was just coming for all the corporate entities in Hollywood. And so it came for Disney. They founded a resolution eventually, but it in ways scarred Walt. He was grumpier after the unionization effort. He felt somewhat betrayed by all these people he thought were his family. Again, he was Uncle Walt. And then they're picketing and stopping production because they're unhappy with him as he would see it. But it ended up being better rights for the animators and the workers at the studio overall. And so with Dumbo coming out, he was set to be Time's Mammal of the Year. It was a cheaper production as they were working on. They went back, as I said, to their basics with short film style, very impressionistic parts of Dumbo. And it was a major hit. It was exactly what they needed in 1941. Now, Dumbo never did end up on Time magazine's cover. Unfortunately for the Mammal of the Year, Pearl Harbor was attacked and World War I broke out. And so the cover that would have been Dumbo's was given, of course, to the bombing of Pearl Harbor and subsequently getting into World War II. As we got into World War II, the Disney studio, they've gone past the union effort. The strike has ended, but now the war's broken out, and some of the young men animators are off overseas. For a period, there's actually some of the army that's occupying parts of the Disney studio, mostly kind of for training stuff, marching around the studio lot. It did not shut down anything at Disney, but they were occupying some of the space. And long-form movies were a challenge. So many people were off at war. And so Walt's focus shifted a lot to propaganda, a lot of government money to help pay the bills. A famous book at the time, Victory Through Air Power, Walt animated and really got a lot of attention for the Air Force in a way that it hadn't been prior to the Victory Through Air Power book and movie coming out, and then the use of air in World War II. Donald stars in a short film called Der Fuhrer's Face, where he interacts with Hitler, you might say, throws a tomato in Hitler's face. Very propaganda. And some folks at the Disney studios even designed emblems for people in the military. This one in particular is an insignia for the Navy Scouting Squadron. So a lot of the early part of the 40s was not major movie production as Walt was hoping to have ramped up, but shifted back to some short films, propaganda pieces, educational pieces, just to keep the lights on in some ways. And also to get around having fewer animators on staff because so many are overseas, they shift to a feature-length movie model that they call package films. During the early days of World War II, Walt and a group are sent to South America on a goodwill trip to try to combat some of the Nazis' efforts to sway South American countries to their cause. Coming from that, Walt creates 2 films, Saludos Amigos, which has Goofy play a cowboy in Mexico, Donald meets up with a parrot in, I think, Argentina. There's some live action pieces of film that Walt and the group recorded when they were on the South American tour. Something of a, hey, Americans, here's our southern neighbors. Get to know them a little bit better was the thought. It was a government-sponsored event to really get some goodwill down in those countries, but turned into Saludos Amigos. And that film was so popular that they also released The Three Caballeros, which similarly was some footage they had from the South American trip, some live action footage. Donald once again meets some South American friends. There's some musical numbers, things like that. And so these two are both popular. They do what they needed to as the Goodwill Tour. They get a lot of interest, both Disney films down there and interest in South America and the United States. And so they switched, because of the success of those and because of the necessities of the time, they switched to the package model. When Walt first envisioned Fantasia, he thought of a movie that would be re-released every few years with new musical pieces and new animation to go with those classical pieces. Because the production cost so much on Fantasia and it did not do so well, that idea didn't pan out. But they did create Make Mine Music, Melody Time, which are more contemporary music pieces set to animation. A very different concept than Fantasia, but proved well. They were cheaper productions. They were able to get through the early to mid 40s during the war with very little issue from and some funding from those movies. Fun and Fancy Free is another packaged film. It's some live action footage. Candace Bergen's dad, I'm forgetting his name, but he was a puppeteer. Edgar Bergen. He's in there and does puppet show. There's an animated piece with Mickey and the Beanstalk, and a couple other things there. Again, a cheaper production, shorter pieces put together in a feature length. And then the final packaged film of the 1940s was Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Two films put together. The Wind in the Willows, a version of Wind in the Willows with J. Thaddeus Toad and his adventures. And then, of course, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow with Ichabod Crane, one of my favorites for Halloween. So that gets Walt through the 40s. But unfortunately, with the war, any film revenue that with films released in Europe was stuck in Europe. And so there is Pinocchio, some of the other movies that were released in Europe. He has revenue, the Disney company has money from that, but they aren't able to access it for keeping the lights on in Burbank at home. Eventually it would mean that Walt starts live action productions in Europe, but that wouldn't get really arranged until the 30s. And so in this period, they start re-releasing some of their films. Snow White comes out 7 years after the initial release in 1944. Something we just have sitting on the shelf. Let's get it back in the theaters. A new generation. And let's try to just get some interest, a little bit more money coming in right now. And that starts a trend of re-releasing films from the Disney vault every 7 years or so, which would be a practice that continued up until the DVD and Blu-ray era, until just a few years ago. Beginning in the 1950s, because of the revenue from European films being stuck in Europe, the packaged films being moderately successful, Walt is struggling. The Disney studio is struggling. They're a bit at an inflection point of make or break. They released Cinderella, a true Cinderella story for them. If it had not done well, they probably would have gone under. But in 1950, that movie is a major hit and propels them into the 1950s with great success. They released Alice in Wonderland in 1951, Peter Pan in 1953, Lady and the Tramp in 1955 with a scene inspired by a real event of Walt giving his wife Lillian a dog at Christmas in a hat box. Sleeping Beauty in 1959 is to that date the most expensive production for any film. The scene where Maleficent transforms into a dragon was roughly about $6.5 million by itself. So once again, Walt has had some success going into the mid-50s to late 50s, but some production. They've gotten a little more confidence, but maybe a little bit more expensive. And going into the 1960s, they're trying to find ways to be more economic, be a little more technologically advanced. With 101 Dalmatians, this is the first film where they use the Xerox method. Xerox, like copiers, printers, that sort of thing. Previously, up until 1961, from essentially the beginning of the studio, they used the ink and paint cell style. And so the animators would draw what they wanted to animate. The ink and paint department would then copy those animators' pictures onto the cell, which would then be painted and filmed for the actual movie. With the Xerox method, they were able to eliminate an entire department of the Disney studio. Unfortunately for the ink and paint department, that didn't mean they lost all their jobs. But at a time when production had gotten very expensive, it was a get and make or break kind of situation that they needed to be more technologically advanced. They needed to keep up with the times, but it also meant they could be faster in their production, cheaper in their production, and not have any drop in quality. Sword in the Stone and then The Jungle Book are two of the last films that Walt has any direct involvement in. Because some of his attention has been switched to television. He wants to open Disneyland, which does open in 1955. And being on the cutting edge, or trying to be on the cutting edge of technology, Walt, to fund the creation of Disneyland, purchased television. Very unique for a studio mogul at the time. Most of the studio heads were afraid of television. It was going to take people out of the theaters. But Walt embraced it with one, Mickey Mouse Club, Davy Crockett, which was a massive hit. The coonskin cat became a cultural icon for nearly anyone of all ages in the 1950s. And then, of course, the Disneyland anthology series, something of a program just to hype up the future theme park he was building. But they would have episodes on Adventureland or Fantasyland, Tomorrowland, and Frontierland, which could be the Davy Crockett shows or a sci-fi show, an anthology series where they don't have to continue storytelling, but get a new audience, people at home that might not be going to the theaters. And so Disneyland opens in 1955, and Walt's attention has largely shifted from the movie production to his live action park. Some of the TV production, but really his live action parks. That becomes his favorite thing to do. He even introduces on the Disneyland TV show his concept for the experimental prototype city of tomorrow, which become Epcot. In the real world today, it does not look anything like Walt's idea, but he was getting into urban planning as an additional side thing. He's gone from movie production to theme park production and now to urban planning towards the end of his life. The one thing he does do, he comes back to the movie studio for the production of Mary Poppins. He has a very direct hand in Mary Poppins. I would say this is Walt's magnum opus. It's, I think, the greatest movie he produced in his lifetime. It combines everything from his life. It has live action people mixed with animation, like the Alice comedies in the 20s. It has pure animation. It has live action. It has special effects. It has stunts. And he is quoted at the time of saying that he came to the movie studio and it just seemed like everybody had a smile on their face. Except maybe Pamela Travers, the author of Mary Poppins, a grumpy woman of her own, but she was not the happiest with his production of Mary Poppins, despite everyone else in Disney Studios being happy in the Mary Poppins production. Unfortunately, though, in 1966, Walt passes away. He was a lifetime chain smoker. At Disney World and Disneyland now, the direction you give is 2 fingers. In some cultures, one finger is seen as rude, and so Walt Disney World says that this is less rude. But there's also a theory that so many pictures Walt is pictured with two fingers because he had a cigarette in his fingers that mysteriously disappeared in several of those pictures. Might have been whitewashed out. But Walt does pass away of lung cancer in 1966. Very surprising. Of course, lung cancer was not as well known at the time. The Surgeon General's warning of cigarette smoking comes out just 3 years before then. And so it takes the studio and the world, as you can see Mickey the Globe there crying, by surprise. The movie studio for roughly 20 years is kind of lost. What is Disney without Walt? Several movies were already in production when he passed, but they take a lesser quality. They take more time than some of the older productions. The animators, everyone's distraught. Very few people know what to do. His brother Roy, as they were working on Epcot, forces, as sort of the last thing of his life, forces through the creation of Walt Disney World Magic Kingdom. And he himself dies in the mid-70s, about a month after Disney World opens. He got his brother's Walt Disney World and Epcot project off the ground. It was going as he wanted it to, as Roy wanted, to honor his brother, but then he himself passes away. And so there's an era of who's in charge? What are we wanting to be now, the Walt Disney Company? There are some successes. The Aristocats, Robin Hood, the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh were short films like the package movies in the 40s. They were released as Winnie the Pooh shorts before some other movies, and then they put 3 or 4 of them together for the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. The Rescuers and Fox and the Hound, moderate successes. We get to 1984 with Black Cauldron. It was a movie in production for 10 years straight. Very expensive. They didn't really know what they were doing with it. It was based on the book series, but they were trying to condense, I think it's 5 books into a 90-minute movie. Didn't work out quite so well. It comes out and loses in the box office to the Care Bears movie. In the mid-'80s, there is a lot of corporate raiders, hedge funds and things, buying up companies and dismantling them for parts. Because of the lack of success in movies, and really only at this stage, the theme parks making any profit, Disney as a company is at risk for corporate raiders. With the failure of Black Cauldron and the wolves at the door threatening to dismantle the Disney company, Roy E. Disney, Walt's nephew, steps in, essentially stages a coup, and brings in Michael Eisner and Frank Wells as the new president and CEO of the Disney company. Michael Eisner brings in Jeffrey Katzenberg to head the movie studio. And I call this Eisner, Wells, Katzenberg triumvirate. If you know Julius Caesar and some of your Roman history, Michael Eisner, I feel, is a bit of a Julius Caesar type figure. And these 3 men will have, in the mid-'90s, a bit of a Shakespearean drama. But before that happens, we enter the Disney Renaissance. Started in 1989 with The Little Mermaid, a massive hit for the company, particularly over some lesser hits in the mid-'80s. The Rescuers Down Under in 1990 is the first sequel to any Disney movie released in theaters. When The Three Little Pigs came out in 1933, it was a massive hit. Remember, Big Bad Wolf was an anthem for the Great Depression. Because of the hit of that, several people said, well, what do you do with pigs next? And Walt said, never follow up pigs with pigs. So there were never any sequels until the 1990s. And interestingly, they chose The Rescuers, an Australian version of The Rescuers, for that sequel. But we get into the true meat of the Disney Renaissance. In 1992, Beauty and the Beast comes out, and they have a dual marketing campaign with Beauty and the Beast. This poster I have here is their date night version. They were marketing it to couples as a romance movie, but they also had a separate full marketing campaign that was more traditionally better colors, more vibrant colors, fun, the jokes from the movie, to get the kids wanting to go with their parents. But they were also pushing a date night marketing campaign with Beauty and the Beast. In 1992, Aladdin comes out, and on the back, really, of Robin Williams' comedic energy, the genie from Aladdin, that becomes a massive hit. So the Disney Renaissance is off to a great start. Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg have some good confidence here in the mid-90s, several hits now. The big movie in production then at that point was a historic drama about Pocahontas. A lot of the animators were excited to work on the more prestige movie, Pocahontas, than some little lion movie based on Hamlet. In reality, The Lion King comes out, and it is arguably the biggest hit of the Disney Renaissance. It has a massive soundtrack. It's very, very popular. The movie Pocahontas comes out in 1995 and is plagued with some controversy. They've aged up Pocahontas. There's a lot of, is this the best representation for Native Americans? And it does not perform as well. The movie seen as the more prestige film by the animators and the studio staff fails in comparison to The Lion King, which was seen as a lesser movie. The Hunchback of Notre Dame comes out, an adaptation of Victor Hugo's novel. If you've ever read The Hunchback of Notre Dame, it's dark. Everyone dies. And so Disney had to lighten that up quite a bit. The Hunchback of Notre Dame it runs into some issues with tone. Because Aladdin was such a big hit on Robin Williams' comedic timing, they do some similar comedy things in The Hunchback, and it just does not hit the tone that they were shooting for. Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan finish up the Disney Renaissance. All technological marvels. Mulan used computer generation for a enormous group charging scene with the Huns, which combined computer generation with traditional 2D animation. Tarzan, with the poster there, you see he's sliding across the vines. They used, again, computer graphics to create a program that would take their 2D Tarzan and spin him around the vines for the animated sequence. So really, a true renaissance, a true back to form with Disney in the 90s. But as I alluded to, there's some Shakespearean tragedy with Frank Wells, Michael Eisner, and Jeffrey Katzenberg here in the mid-90s. Michael Eisner's confidant, his really sounding board, much like Walt had Roy, his brother, Michael Eisner has Frank Wells, the president at the time. Frank Wells dies tragically in a helicopter crash. Much like Walt, a major shock. The studio goes into a depression, losing the president. Michael Eisner had informally promised the presidency to Jeffrey Katzenberg. Jeffrey Katzenberg had done very good with the Disney Renaissance animation movies. They've had several successes. But Michael Eisner did not feel like Jeffrey Katzenberg was ready for that role, and they had a major split. Jeffrey Katzenberg partners up with Steven Spielberg to open the rival animation studio DreamWorks, who later wins some Oscars against Disney when Disney's movies were lacking in quality. But at this time, Michael Eisner, sort of like Julius Caesar, consolidates his triumvirate power. When Frank Wells dies, takes over both the CEO and the presidency role. When Jeffrey Katzenberg leaves, he tries to replace the movie studio head with somebody else, but there's a rotating door with all of the people he puts in place, and really has his finger on the pulse of everything in the studio. He's trying to be like Walt. One little girl when Walt was working in the studio said, "So, Mr. Disney, do you draw Mickey?" He says, "No, I don't draw Mickey anymore." "Well, do you run the camera? No, I don't run the camera. And she says, well, Mr. Disney, what do you do? And he says, well, I'm kind of like a honeybee. And I go from department to department, checking in with everything that's going on, giving feedback when I need to. And so Walt really did, in a lot of ways, micromanage the whole studio at the time. And Michael Eisner tries to do something similar. But around the time that Frank Wells has the helicopter crash in passes, Michael Eisner has a major heart attack. All the stress that's on him, all the success and the negativity that is on him gives him a heart attack. And afterwards, he seems to have he seems to be a little more risk averse, a lot safer. As well done as the Disney Renaissance films were, some of the quality starts waning, and they start with straight-to-video sequels, and more and more and more. The cheap production that you can do with a VHS release, get it into homes, easier than distributing it to movie theaters and things like that, in some ways plagues the studios with all these sequels. These are not done by the main main animation studio. It is done by a studio called Disney Toon Studios. Lesser budgets. Sometimes they get the original voice actors. Sometimes it's not. In Return of Jafar, Robin Williams had gotten in some crossways with Disney after the release of Aladdin and refused to come back for the sequel to play the iconic role of the genie. And so they got Dan Castellaneta of Homer Simpson fame to impersonate Robin Williams. He did an okay job, but it was a lesser production. The Return of Jafar was not intended to be a massive theater hit. It was in some ways, quick cash grab of get them into homes, let's get their cash. And there is the complaint that Michael Eisner has gotten too safe, less risky with both what he's doing with narrative storytelling, what he's doing with some of the financial aspects and home video releases of the studio. And there's also a little startup up north from Anaheim in the Bay Area called Pixar. In the mid-'80s, Pixar starts as a branch of George Lucas's Lucasfilm company. When George Lucas goes through a divorce in the mid-'80s, he has to sell off some of his assets just to get through the divorce, one of which is the animation studio Pixar. Steve Jobs ends up buying Pixar, and his love of art and technology, paired with some of the heads of Pixar, John Lasseter and Ed Catmull. Lasseter has an animation background, worked for the Disney Animation Studio in the 80s, and Ed Catmull has a PhD in computer science, one of the first classes of computer science PhDs. And so this group of three, loving art, loving technology, released Toy Story in 1995, the first fully computer-generated animated film. And for 10 years, they have hit after hit after hit in the exact category that Disney was famous for. Disney has the distribution rights for all of Pixar. And including before Toy Story 2 came out, there was a risk when Michael Eisner was being a little more cautious with what he was doing. There was talk of them doing Disney releasing a direct-to-video sequel to Toy Story that would not be done by Pixar. They would take those characters, and that did not go over well with Pixar folks. Much like Disney in the 30s losing Oswald. The Pixar animators, those were the babies. That's my character. You can't have that. And so John Lasseter and the rest of Pixar fight for their characters. We ended up releasing Toy Story 2 on their own, done the way they want, and have hit after hit. As I said, in the same category that Disney used to be in. While Michael Eisner was getting a little more cautious with home video releases and things like that, the main animation studio was entering an experimental era. Partly trying to differentiate themselves from Pixar. Who are we as in the same category, essentially our cousin? but they're doing better than us. What do we do to get back on top? In 2000, they finally released a true sequel, like Walt had talked about, to Fantasia, that is all new animation, all new songs, all new classical pieces. It does not, like the original Fantasia, does not do as well as they might have hoped. It has its audience, certainly has a cult following, both Fantasias, and are art in and of themselves, but is not garnering a major wide audience. Dinosaur is an experiment they do combining computer-generated characters with live-action backgrounds. Once again, kind of combining what they were doing with the Alice comedies of the 20s, just a bit of reverse. It also does not perform great in the theaters, but is testing the boundaries of what are we as Disney? Who are we as Disney? The Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, and Treasure Planet are reimaginings of several old stories. The Emperor Has No Clothes. The Emperor's New Groove goes through several changes, iterations before it becomes the Emperor's New Groove, but certainly has its cult following. A lot of these movies in this experimental era have cult followings. Atlantis is a steampunk imagining of the Atlantis myth. Treasure Planet is the treasure island in space, including their ship is the RLS, as in Robert Louis Stevenson. An idea, just set the same Treasure Planet story in space. Let's just have some fun with it. Lilo and Stitch, a small kind of family movie about a family that adopts an alien in Hawaii. Major cult hit, including they released a live-action version, live-action remake last year. Brother Bear, Home on the Range, and Chicken Little all underperformed at the box office. Chicken Little is Disney's first fully CGI movie. 10 years after Pixar releases Toy Story, Disney gets their first full-length, feature-length, and computer-generated movie out, and it underperforms. It is, I think, currently their worst-rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes. For 10 years, Disney has distributed the Pixar movies, but not outright owned them. And Pixar had gotten upset with Michael Eisner, threatening to release some of their characters on straight-to-home junk movies as they envisioned it. And so Bob Iger repairs this relationship with Pixar, buys them in 2006 outright, and it is the best mending of this relationship. What Bob Iger does to both get Pixar more friendly and get the Disney Animation Studio Movies in production during the lead up to the COVID era, but when everybody's stuck at home, all movie studios have to shift to a streaming model. How do we make money when nobody can go to the theater? And I think it does hurt a lot of the movies at this time. One of the first they released during the COVID era, they had released Disney Plus in 2019 as their streaming service. And so they were able to release Raya and the Last Dragon, the first Disney animated feature that would not be released in theaters, but would go straight to streaming for about the price of what a movie ticket would cost you, but you just watched it in your own home. Because of that, and just COVID in general, Raya does not get the audience that it might have if it were released in theaters. Encanto is released in theaters the next year, does not perform well in theaters, but when it's released on streaming a few months later, becomes a massive hit. We Don't Talk About Bruno was one of the top songs that year. But it had, almost no one had seen it in theaters. The next one, even less people saw. Strange World came out in 2023, and still some of the reasons behind the COVID era. Some theaters still requiring masks, some people just aren't going to the theaters yet. It underperforms But I think Disney did not market this movie at all. To this day, raise your hands, how many of you have even heard of Strange World? About 3.
And we're people that would go to a Disney park.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I actually have some coasters. There is a card game. Strange World's a very interesting movie. It takes place inside, it's a family of explorers, and it takes place inside a giant turtle. They're exploring this giant turtle. But there's a card game in it that I have a set of drink coasters for. It's unlike Strange World, but almost no one's seen it. Then we get to Wish, which is Disney's centennial movie release. Disney Brothers Studio opened in 1923, and in 2023, they were pushing their 100th birthday really hard. Their animated movie for their 100th birthday, Wish, is not great. I laughed and I said to my brother, I think that will make a very good fireworks show someday, but it is not a very good movie. And so, getting into the middle of this COVID streaming era, Encanto's been a big hit, but a lot of these movies no one's seen or even heard of. They very much underperform in the theater or are downright panned, which has about a 40 or 30% on Rotten Tomatoes. But getting to modern day, last year we had Moana 2, once again, a sequel to one of their popular animated movies. This started as a TV show for Disney+. And it kind of feels that way in the movie. There are very clear kind of 20-minute arcs, I think. It performs well, and next year they have a live-action version of Moana coming out. And then this year, Zootopia 2 has come out just this week. Another sequel, but it has performed very well just so far, and it is about an 80%. So Disney has many, many ebb and flows in its 100-year time span. Sometimes it takes a coup to reinvigorate some of that energy for the animation studio and the company itself. But there are good times and there are bad times always with Disney company, and they always are trying to make art. Even when it doesn't turn out well, they're trying to push the technological envelope, or could we experiment with releasing a feature-length movie on streaming? Didn't work out well, but we gave it a shot. So they do try to experiment and release the best thing they can.
Now it's time to...
But now it's time to say goodbye.
Just says can't load the audio right now.